Isaiah Rivers saw the small girl sitting alone on the bench outside Lincoln Park at 6:43 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Dirty dress that had once been expensive silk, now torn and stained with mud. Tear-stained cheeks reflecting the last golden light of sunset, and stomach growling loud enough to hear from 10 feet away in the particular rhythm of hunger that Isaiah recognized because he'd heard it in his own stomach more times than he could count over the past 3 years. He thought she was lost or abandoned, and that giving her his last granola bar was just basic human decency from someone who understood hunger intimately, who knew what it felt like to skip meals so your child could eat. Who knew the hollow ache that came from choosing between food and medicine, and always choosing medicine because your son's next breath mattered more than your next meal? But it wasn't basic decency that would be rewarded with gratitude and nothing more. It wasn't a random act of kindness between strangers who would never see each other again. Wasn't the kind of moment that feels good but changes nothing. Wasn't compassion that would be forgotten by morning. It wasn't a lost child waiting for struggling parents who were searching frantically. Wasn't a runaway from poverty seeking help from someone who barely had more than she did. It was Lily Prescott, 7-year-old daughter of Christine Prescott, the billionaire CEO who owned half the city's real estate and whose name appeared on buildings throughout downtown, who was about to make Isaiah an offer that would transform his 6-year-old son's entire future, who would give him everything he'd been desperately praying for during 3 years of working 2 jobs and still falling short every single month. Because sometimes the person you help when you have nothing becomes the person who gives you everything. Because sometimes giving away your last meal opens doors you didn't know existed. Because sometimes kindness isn't just its own reward, but becomes the investment that pays returns you never imagined. Because sometimes the hungry child on the park bench isn't what she appears to be, and your compassion when you're desperate yourself is exactly what someone with resources has been searching for, without knowing how to find it. If you believe kindness should always be rewarded, that compassion matters more than wealth, that helping someone when you have nothing is worth more than helping when you have everything, please like this video right now, share it with someone who needs this message of hope, and comment below where you're watching from. Every like and share helps stories about compassion and unexpected blessings reach people who need to see them, who need to know that giving when you're struggling isn't foolish but transformative. Who need to believe that good things can still happen to good people, even when life feels impossible. Isaiah Rivers was 34 years old and a single father working 2 jobs to support his 6-year-old son Noah, who had asthma that required expensive medication and frequent doctor visits, and the kind of constant vigilance that made working full-time jobs feel like an impossible balance between keeping his son alive and keeping them housed and fed. He worked warehouse shifts during the day, 8 hours of loading and unloading trucks, and moving boxes and physical labor that left his back aching and his hands calloused. Then worked security guard shifts at night. 4 hours of watching monitors and walking empty buildings, and staying awake when exhaustion pulled at him like gravity. All so he could afford the rent on their small apartment and the inhaler that let Noah breathe and the nebulizer treatments that prevented emergency room visits that would destroy them financially. His wife had left 3 years ago when Noah's medical bills had started accumulating faster than they could pay them, when the reality of parenting a chronically ill child had proven too overwhelming, when she'd looked at their mounting debt and their shrinking bank account and their son's labored breathing, and had decided she couldn't handle it, had walked away from both of them without looking back, without sending child support, without calling to check on the son she claimed to love, until love required sacrifice she wasn't willing to make. Isaiah had been raising Noah alone ever since, had learned to be both mother and father. had learned to skip meals so his son could eat, had learned to work when his body begged for rest because rest didn't pay for inhalers or rent or the electricity that powered the nebulizer. That sometimes was the only thing standing between Noah and the hospital. He lived paycheck to paycheck in the particular way that meant one unexpected expense could destroy everything. That meant calculating every dollar before spending it. That meant choosing between necessities because affording all necessities simultaneously was impossible on $24,000 annually, from 2 jobs that consumed every hour he wasn't sleeping or parenting. This Tuesday evening, he had $23 in his bank account until Friday's paycheck. Had just spent his last $45 on Noah's inhaler prescription, refill that insurance only partially covered, had walked out of the pharmacy with the medication that would keep his son breathing for the next month, and absolutely nothing left for groceries or gas, or the dinner he'd been planning to skip anyway, because skipping meals had become routine over the past 3 years. He had 1 granola bar left in his backpack, the bar he'd brought from home that morning intending to eat for lunch, but had saved for dinner instead. The chocolate chip granola bar that was literally his only food until he could figure out how to make $23 stretch across 3 days of feeding himself and Noah. The bar he'd been looking forward to eating during his walk home from the warehouse job that had just ended. His only sustenance until he could work his night security shift and come home Thursday morning and figure out how to create meals from nothing. He was walking home from his warehouse shift at 6:43 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, exhausted and hungry, and trying not to think about the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, trying to focus instead on the fact that Noah had his inhaler, and that was what mattered, that his son could breathe, and everything else was secondary to that single essential fact. Lily Prescott was 7 years old and appeared homeless or lost when Isaiah first saw her. Small figure hunched on a park bench, in a dress that had clearly been expensive once. Pale blue silk with delicate embroidery. The kind of dress wealthy parents bought for special occasions. But was now dirty and torn and stained with mud, like she'd been wearing it for days, or had been crawling through places children in expensive dresses shouldn't crawl. She was sitting alone on the bench outside Lincoln Park at 6:43 p.m., crying with her face in her hands, small shoulders shaking with sobs she was trying to muffle, looking terrified and lost and desperately alone in ways that made Isaiah's heart clench because she couldn't have been much older than Noah, and no child should be that scared and that alone. She'd run away from her nanny 4 hours ago when the nanny had been distracted by a phone call in the park, had slipped away while the nanny scrolled through messages, had walked and walked until she was blocks from home and completely lost but too stubborn to ask for help. Too angry at her mother to care that she was scaring everyone who was supposed to be watching her. She was the daughter of Christine Prescott, whose name was synonymous with wealth and power in real estate empire, whose mother worked 80-hour weeks building and acquiring and expanding business holdings that made her one of the richest women in the city, whose mother had so little time for her daughter that Lily had started to wonder if she was just another acquisition, another possession that required maintenance, but not actual attention or love. She felt invisible to her mother in the way children feel invisible when parents are too busy to notice them. When work consumes all available energy and children get whatever's left, which is usually nothing. When quality time becomes 20 minutes before bed, if the parent makes it home before the child is already asleep. She'd run away because she'd wanted attention, wanted her mother to notice she was gone, wanted to matter enough that her absence would be felt, wanted proof that she was more than just another responsibility to be delegated to nannies and tutors and staff who were paid to care because her mother was too busy earning money to spend the time that money was supposed to buy. All she wanted was love and attention and time with the mother who was always at the office, always in meetings, always too busy for the daughter who needed her more than she needed another building with the Prescott name on it. She hadn't eaten since lunch at school 7 hours ago, hadn't thought to bring food when she ran away, hadn't realized that running away would leave her hungry and scared and completely lost in a city that suddenly felt enormous and hostile. Her stomach growled loudly as Isaiah approached, the sound audible from 10 feet away, the particular rumble of a child who'd missed dinner and didn't know when or where her next meal would come from. Who was discovering that rebellion came with consequences she hadn't anticipated? That being lost meant being hungry, meant being scared in ways she'd never experienced in her privilege-protected life. At Lincoln Park at 6:43 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, when the sun was setting and the temperature was dropping and responsible parents were calling their children home for dinner, Isaiah walked past the bench where Lily sat crying, saw the small girl alone with no adults visible anywhere, heard her stomach growling loud enough to penetrate his own hunger-induced fog, watched her shoulders shake with sobs she couldn't control, noticed her bare feet because wherever her shoes had gone, she'd lost them during her 4-hour unplanned adventure, saw that she was maybe 7 years old and terrified and desperately alone and crying in ways that suggested she'd been crying for a very long time. He stopped walking even though he was exhausted, even though his own stomach was empty, even though every instinct said keep moving, because getting involved meant complications he couldn't afford, because he looked at her and saw Noah, saw his own son at that age. Imagine Noah lost and scared and hungry with strangers walking past without stopping. Would you give your last meal to a hungry stranger when you're desperate yourself? When you don't know where your next meal is coming from? When helping someone else means going without? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. At 6:45 p.m., 2 minutes after seeing the crying child on the park bench, Isaiah stopped walking, even though stopping meant getting home later, meant delaying the moment when he could sit down and rest his aching back and feet that had been standing and moving for 10 straight hours of warehouse work. He turned back toward the bench and really looked at the girl, cataloged details with the systematic attention of a father who'd learned to assess his own child's well-being through observation. Who could tell from across a room whether Noah was breathing easily or struggling, whether a cough meant nothing or meant emergency room, whether tears were from frustration or genuine distress. She was maybe 7 years old, close enough to Noah's age that looking at her felt like looking at his son, close enough that his protective instincts activated automatically without conscious decision. Her dress had been expensive once, pale blue silk with embroidery that suggested wealth and careful selection, the kind of dress that cost more than Isaiah made in a week, but was now dirty and torn and stained with mud in ways that meant she'd been wearing it for hours in places children in silk dresses weren't supposed to go. She had no shoes on her feet, bare soles pressed against cold concrete, toes curled against the November evening chill, and Isaiah wondered where her shoes had gone, whether she'd lost them running or whether she'd kicked them off in frustration, whether anyone was looking for the expensive shoes or for the child who'd been wearing them. Her arms were wrapped around herself in the universal posture of someone trying to hold themselves together, trying to create warmth or comfort or protection from a world that felt hostile and enormous and terrifying. She was shivering, but not from cold, because the evening wasn't that cold yet. Shivering from fear or exhaustion, or the overwhelming crash that comes when adrenaline fades and leaves only the reality of being lost and alone and desperately scared. She was looking around desperately, head turning left and right like she was searching for someone or something she couldn't find. eyes scanning faces of people who walked past without seeing her, without stopping, without caring that a 7-year-old was alone and crying and clearly in distress. Isaiah processed the situation with the careful assessment of someone who'd learned that helping required understanding, that good intentions without accurate evaluation could make situations worse, that knowing what someone needed was more important than assuming what they needed. She was alone with no adults visible anywhere in the park or on the surrounding streets, no parent calling her name, no frantic searching, no one who seemed to be connected to this lost, crying child. She was scared in ways that went beyond simple fear, crying with the desperate sobs of someone who'd been holding it together for as long as possible and had finally broken, shaking in ways that suggested genuine terror, not just temporary upset. She was hungry, her stomach growling loud enough that Isaiah could hear it from where he stood 10 feet away, the particular sound of a child who'd missed a meal and whose body was protesting the deprivation, hungry in ways that meant she needed food immediately, not eventually. She was lost or abandoned, either separated from parents who were searching or left by parents who weren't. Either scenario requiring intervention from someone who cared enough to stop. She was the same age as Noah, 7 years old with her whole life ahead of her, but right now experiencing something that would shape how she understood the world. Whether adults could be trusted, whether strangers were dangerous or kind, whether asking for help was safe or risky. He had one granola bar in his backpack, the chocolate chip bar he'd been saving for dinner, the bar that represented his only food until he could figure out how to make $23 feed both himself and Noah for 3 days. He was hungry too after working 10 hours of physical labor, stomach empty since the toast he'd eaten at 5 a.m. before Noah woke up. Body depleted in ways that made even standing feel like effort, exhausted and depleted, and desperately in need of the calories that granola bar represented. But she needed it more. That assessment was immediate and undeniable. She was a child and he was an adult. She was lost and scared, and he at least knew where he was going. She hadn't eaten since lunch, and he'd at least had breakfast. She was someone's daughter, and he was someone's father. And the math of that equation was simple even when simple meant sacrifice. She was a child. That fact overrode everything else. Overrode his hunger and his exhaustion and his own desperate circumstances. Because children didn't choose to be lost or abandoned or hungry. Children deserve protection and care and help from adults who were capable of providing those things even when providing cost them something they couldn't afford to give. What if this was Noah? That thought crashed through every objection his survival instincts raised. What if his son was lost and scared and hungry and alone? What if Noah was sitting on a park bench crying while strangers walked past without stopping? What if his child needed help and every adult chose their own comfort over his son's desperate need? He could skip dinner, had done it before more times than he could count over 3 years of single parenthood on poverty wages. Had learned that adults could survive missed meals in ways children couldn't. Had discovered that hunger was temporary discomfort, but his son's needs were permanent priority. Had made this calculation so many times, it was automatic now, reflexive. The instant assessment that said you eat last, and sometimes you don't eat at all. And that's just what parents do when resources are limited and love is infinite. At 6:47 p.m., 4 minutes after stopping to look at the crying child, Isaiah approached the bench with deliberate slowness, with careful attention to not seeming threatening, with the practiced gentleness of someone who understood that frightened children needed adults to be predictable and safe, and obviously non-threatening. "Hey there," he said quietly, voice calm and warm despite his own exhaustion. You okay?" The girl looked up, terror flashing across her face as she registered that a stranger was talking to her, that an adult man she didn't know was approaching, that she was alone and vulnerable, and he could be anyone, could mean anything, could be dangerous in ways her privileged, protected life hadn't prepared her to evaluate. Isaiah saw the fear and immediately knelt down so he wasn't towering over her, made himself smaller and less threatening, positioned himself at her eye level in the universal signal of adults who understand that children need to feel safe before they can accept help. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently, the promise explicit because fear required explicit reassurance, because this child needed to know his intentions before she could trust his actions. "You look hungry." He pulled his backpack around, unzipped the front pocket where he'd stored the granola bar that morning, extracted the bar that was wrapped in its plastic wrapper with the cheerful packaging that promised chocolate chips and whole grains and energy he desperately needed. "This is all I have, but you need it more than I do." Lily stared at the granola bar like it might disappear if she looked away, like it might be a trick or a test or something she was imagining because hunger and fear were making her see things that weren't real. "Really," she whispered, the question carrying disbelief that a stranger would give her food, that an adult who didn't know her would offer his only meal, that someone would help her when she'd spent 4 hours watching people walk past without stopping. "Really," Isaiah confirmed, his voice steady and sure. "When did you last eat?" "Lunch," Lily said quietly, the admission carrying shame like somehow being hungry was her fault. "At school." "That's too long," Isaiah said, extending the granola bar toward her. "Here, take it. You need it more than I do." At 6:50 p.m., 3 minutes after Isaiah had given her the granola bar, Lily was eating desperately with the focused intensity of someone who was genuinely hungry. Not just wanting a snack, but needing food. Tearing open the wrapper with shaking hands and taking bites that were too large because her body was demanding fuel and demanding it now. Isaiah sat beside her on the bench, careful to leave respectful distance between them, careful to not crowd or hover or make her feel trapped, careful to be present without being threatening, to be available without being invasive. "What's your name?" Isaiah asked when she had eaten half the bar and her desperate hunger had eased slightly into something more manageable. "Lily," she said between bites, the name small and uncertain, like she wasn't sure if giving it was safe, like sharing even that basic information required trust she didn't know if she should give. "I'm Isaiah," he offered in return, the exchange of names creating small connection between strangers who'd been strangers minutes ago. "Where are your parents?" The question was gentle but necessary. Was the next logical step in helping her? Was the information he needed to figure out what to do next? Lily's face crumpled, tears starting again, not from fear this time, but from the deeper pain that had driven her to run in the first place. From the loneliness that had made running away seem like a solution instead of creating new problems. "Mommy's always at work," she said, the words carrying the particular grief of children who are materially provided for but emotionally neglected, who have everything except what they actually need, which is time and attention and presence from the parent who's too busy building empire to notice the daughter who's drowning in the wealth that empire creates. "She doesn't have time for me." The statement was simple and devastating, was the core truth beneath the running away, was the wound that had driven a 7-year-old to choose being lost over being invisible. "So I ran away," Lily continued, the confession tumbling out because Isaiah's kindness had created safety, because feeding her had earned trust, because his gentleness made her believe that maybe sharing her pain wouldn't be met with dismissal or punishment. "I thought maybe she'd notice if I was gone. The hope in those words broke Isaiah's heart. The desperate wish that absence would matter more than presence had, that being missing would get attention that being present never received, that her mother would care more about her gone than about her there. Isaiah's realization came with the force of recognition, with the understanding that came from living similar truth from different angle. She wasn't lost, wasn't abandoned by accident or circumstance, wasn't a child separated from parents who were frantically searching. She'd run away deliberately, had chosen this scary outcome because the alternative was scarier, was being invisible in her own home, was having a mother who was too busy for the child who needed her. She was seeking attention from a busy parent who'd prioritized work over presence, who'd given her things instead of time, who'd missed the fundamental truth that children spell love T-I-M-E, not M-O-N-E-Y. He knew this feeling intimately, knew it from the other side, knew what it felt like to be the parent who had to work too much, who came home exhausted, who had so little left to give after survival consumed everything. Noah asked constantly why Daddy worked so much, asked with 7-year-old directness why other kids' parents came to school events and his didn't, why other families had dinner together and they ate separately because Daddy worked nights, why work mattered more than time together. Different circumstances created the same pain. Poverty and wealth arriving at identical destination, both children feeling invisible to parents who were too consumed by work to see them, both wondering if they mattered less than whatever their parents were doing instead of being with them. At 6:55 p.m., 8 minutes after giving away his only food, Isaiah shared the truth that might help this hurting child understand her mother's absence, even if understanding didn't erase the pain. I have a son named Noah, he said, the introduction of his own child creating bridge between their experiences. He's about your age, and sometimes I have to work a lot. The admission cost him something, acknowledge his own failures, name the ways he fell short of the father he wanted to be. But it's because I love him. I work so he can have medicine when he can't breathe, so he can have a home that's warm and safe, so he can have food and clothes and the things he needs to survive and grow. I'm sure your mom loves you too, Isaiah continued, offering the reassurance that Lily desperately needed, even though he'd never met her mother and couldn't know if it was true, offering it because children needed to believe their parents loved them, even when those parents failed to show it in ways children understood. Then why doesn't she spend time with me? Lily asked, the question plaintive and desperate, the core issue beneath all the other issues, the wound that all the money and privilege couldn't heal, because what she needed couldn't be bought. Sometimes grown-ups get confused, Isaiah said carefully, searching for words that would honor both the child's pain and the complexity of adult survival. They think providing means working, think that giving you things is the same as giving you themselves, think that money can substitute for presence, but kids don't need things as much as they need time, don't need another toy as much as they need their parent at bedtime, don't need expensive clothes as much as they need someone who sees them and knows them and chooses to be with them, even when being with them isn't convenient or profitable. At 7 p.m. exactly, 17 minutes after Isaiah had stopped to help a crying child, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb beside the park bench, with the aggressive urgency of people who'd been searching desperately and had finally found what they'd lost. Security guards in dark suits jumped out before the vehicle had fully stopped, moving with professional efficiency and obvious relief, calling out Miss Prescott in voices that carried authority and concern, and the particular panic that comes from being responsible for protecting someone who'd slipped through your protection. A woman in an expensive business suit exited the SUV with the controlled rush of someone trying not to run, trying to maintain composure, trying to hold together when everything inside was fracturing with relief and residual terror. Christine Prescott was tall and polished and powerful, dark hair pulled back severely, suit tailored perfectly, every inch the successful CEO, whose name was on buildings across the city, whose wealth was measured in billions, not millions, whose business acumen was legendary, and whose personal life was apparently a disaster if her 7-year-old daughter was sitting on park benches with strangers because running away seemed preferable to being home. She rushed to Lily with the particular desperation of a mother who'd spent hours imagining every terrible possibility, who'd mobilized security teams and called in favors and likely terrified everyone in her organization with the intensity of her panic. "Lily," she gasped, dropping to her knees and pulling her daughter into an embrace that looked desperate and relieved and terrified all at once. Thank God you're safe." She held Lily like she might disappear again if Christine loosened her grip. Held her like the most precious thing in her world, which maybe she was, even if her actions hadn't always demonstrated that truth. Then Christine noticed Isaiah, noticed the stranger sitting beside her daughter, noticed the man she didn't know who was present in her daughter's crisis. Noticed the granola bar wrapper in Lily's hands. Noticed the way Lily wasn't pulling away from this stranger, which meant something had happened here. Meant some interaction had occurred that Christine needed to understand immediately. Because her daughter's safety was paramount, and strangers near her daughter required explanation and evaluation and immediate assessment of whether they represented continued threat or unexpected help. At 7:05 p.m., 5 minutes after Christine had found her daughter safe but with a stranger, she turned to the security guards flanking her and asked with the sharp authority of someone used to getting immediate answers to every question, "Who is this?" Her tone carried suspicion and protective instinct and the barely controlled panic of a mother who'd spent hours imagining her daughter hurt or taken, or worse, who'd mobilized every resource at her disposal and still hadn't found her until now. Who was looking at a strange man sitting beside her 7-year-old and needed to know immediately whether he represented threat or help or something in between that required careful evaluation. The guards moved toward Isaiah with professional efficiency, positioning themselves between him and Lily, hands moving subtly toward weapons concealed beneath their suits. Body language shifting to protective stance that communicated they were prepared to neutralize any threat to the child they'd failed to protect when she'd run. "Ma'am, we don't know," the lead guard admitted, his voice tight with the embarrassment of having lost the child they were paid to watch, of having spent 4 hours searching while she'd been sitting on a park bench with a stranger they hadn't vetted or cleared or even identified. Christine's attention sharpened on Isaiah, her CEO composure sliding back into place over her maternal terror, ice forming over fear as she assessed this unknown variable in her daughter's crisis. "What were you doing with my daughter?" Christine demanded, the question carrying accusation and threat, and the implication that his answer had better be satisfactory because she had security guards and lawyers and resources to destroy anyone who threatened her child. Her tone making clear that being found with Lily required explanation, and that explanation had better justify why a stranger was sitting beside her missing daughter, giving her food and talking to her like they knew each other. "Mommy, no." Lily's voice cut through the tension with 7-year-old urgency, with the desperation of a child who understood that adults were about to make assumptions that were wrong and unfair and would hurt someone who didn't deserve to be hurt. "He helped me," Lily insisted, pulling away from her mother's embrace to look Christine in the face. to make sure her mother understood what had actually happened instead of what Christine's fear was assuming had happened. "I was hungry and he gave me his food," Lily continued, holding up the granola bar wrapper as evidence, as proof that Isaiah's interaction with her had been kindness, not threat, had been compassion, not danger. "His only food," Lily added, and something in the emphasis made Christine pause, made her reassess, made her look at Isaiah with different eyes that saw beyond stranger danger to the possibility that maybe this man had done something extraordinary instead of something terrible. "What?" Christine said, the single word carrying confusion and disbelief. Because why would a stranger give a lost child his only food? Why would someone who clearly needed that food himself give it away to a child he didn't know? Why would anyone choose a stranger's need over their own when the world had taught her that people always chose themselves first, especially when resources were limited and survival was at stake? "I saw her alone crying," Isaiah explained quietly, his voice steady despite the security guards still positioned like they might tackle him at any moment, despite the scrutiny of a woman whose wealth and power made her dangerous to cross, despite his own exhaustion and hunger making even sitting upright feel like effort. "She said she hadn't eaten since lunch," Isaiah continued, the explanation simple because the situation had been simple, had required no complex moral calculation, had been just a hungry child and an adult who had food, and the obvious ethical imperative that connected those two facts. "I had a granola bar, that's all. I was going to call police next to help her find her family, but then you arrived." The statement was matter of fact, contained no plea for recognition or reward, was just recitation of what had happened and what he'd been planning to do next, was the truth delivered without embellishment or expectation. Christine turned to Lily with the careful attention of a mother trying to verify her child's story, trying to determine if what she was hearing matched what had actually occurred, trying to reconcile the stranger her fear had assumed was dangerous with the helper her daughter was describing. "Is this true?" Christine asked, her voice gentler now but still carrying the weight of verification, still needing confirmation before she could fully release the terror that had gripped her for 4 hours. Lily nodded vigorously, tears starting again. But these were different tears, were tears of relief and gratitude and the overwhelming emotion of being seen and helped when she'd felt invisible and alone. "He was nice, Mommy," Lily said, the simple declaration carrying the authority of a child's direct experience, the certainty of someone who'd been scared and then had been helped and knew the difference between threat and kindness. Not like the people who walked past. The addition hit Christine like a physical blow, made her realize that her daughter had been sitting alone and crying, and hungry, and lots of people had seen her and chosen not to stop, chosen their own convenience over a child's obvious distress, chosen to keep walking because getting involved was complicated and they were busy and surely someone else would help. "Lots of people walked past," Lily repeated, the words indicting everyone who'd seen her suffering and decided it wasn't their problem, everyone who'd prioritized their own comfort over her desperate need. He was the only one who stopped. The statement elevated Isaiah from stranger to hero in the simple mathematics of a child's understanding, in the clear moral framework that said stopping when others walked past made him good in ways that transcended whatever suspicion Christine's fear had generated. At 7:10 p.m., 10 minutes after finding her daughter, Christine really looked at Isaiah for the first time without the filter of maternal panic, without the assumption that strangers near her child meant danger, without the protective instinct that made everyone a potential threat until proven otherwise. She studied him with a systematic assessment of someone who'd built a business empire by reading people accurately, by seeing past surfaces to the truth underneath, by evaluating character and motivation and trustworthiness in the split seconds that determined whether to hire or fire or invest or divest. She saw worn work clothes, navy blue uniform with a name patch that read Riverside Warehouse, fabric faded from repeated washing, pants that had been mended at the knee, boots that were practical and scuffed and clearly designed for physical labor, not for appearance. She saw tired eyes, lines around them that suggested chronic exhaustion, shadows beneath that spoke of too many missed meals and too little sleep, the particular weariness of someone working multiple jobs and still falling short. She saw calloused hands, fingers rough from manual labor, nails clean but permanently stained in ways that no amount of scrubbing could fully erase, hands that told stories of loading and unloading and moving and lifting and working in ways that destroyed soft skin and created permanent evidence of survival through physical effort. He'd given his last food to a stranger's child. That fact reordered everything Christine thought she understood about human nature, challenged her assumptions about poverty and generosity, forced her to confront the reality that someone with nothing had given everything while people with plenty had walked past without stopping. "You said it was your only food," Christine stated, the question implicit in her tone, the verification necessary because surely she'd misunderstood. Surely no one actually gave away their only meal to a stranger's child. Surely there was more to the story that would make the sacrifice less absolute and therefore less devastating and therefore less shameful for everyone who'd had more and given nothing. "I'll eat when I get home," Isaiah said. The lie smooth because he'd told it so many times over 3 years that it came automatically now, came without thought or hesitation, came because admitting he had nothing at home would invite pity or questions or interventions he didn't have energy to navigate. The lie protected his dignity and his privacy and his right to make his own choices about his own survival, even when those choices meant sacrifice that others might judge as foolish or unsustainable, or evidence of poor planning rather than evidence of love that prioritized a stranger's child over his own immediate needs. "Why would you give your only food to a child you don't know?" Christine asked, the question carrying genuine bewilderment, because her world didn't work this way, because people in her experience always wanted something in return for their generosity, because kindness in her orbit came with strings attached and expectations built in and calculations about what the helper would gain from helping. "Because she was hungry and I have a son," Isaiah answered simply, the explanation containing his entire moral framework, the reasoning that made his choice obvious instead of extraordinary. "If he was lost and scared, I'd hope someone would help him," Isaiah continued, voice rougher now with emotion he was trying to control, with the terror every parent carries of their child needing help and not receiving it, of their child being alone and afraid while strangers walk past without stopping. That's what people should do. Help each other. The statement was declarative, was assertion of how the world should work even when the world consistently demonstrated that it didn't work that way, was insistence that moral obligation existed regardless of whether people chose to honor that obligation. Isaiah's phone buzzed in his pocket, the vibration intrusive and unwelcome. The interruption he would have ignored except that texts at this hour might mean no one needed him, might mean the babysitter had an emergency, might mean his son was struggling to breathe and required immediate attention. He checked the screen and his face went pale, color draining as he read the message that appeared there, expression shifting from tired to something approaching, devastated in the space between heartbeats. The text was from the pharmacy, Automated reminder that read Noah Rivers. Inhaler pickup ready. Payment processed 40 or is yours. Thank you for your business. Christine saw his reaction, saw the way he gripped the phone tighter, saw the emotion that flashed across his face before he could control it. Saw that whatever he just read had hit him hard in ways he was trying not to show. Everything okay? She asked. The question gentler now because she recognized pain when she saw it. Recognized the particular expression of parents receiving news about their children. Recognized that whatever had just happened on that phone screen mattered in ways that went beyond simple inconvenience. Yes, Isaiah said, shoving the phone back in his pocket with more force than necessary, standing with the abrupt movement of someone who needed to leave immediately before he fell apart in front of strangers. I need to get home to my son. Wait, Christine said, the command carrying the authority of someone used to people waiting when she asked them to wait, used to controlling conversations and situations and outcomes through sheer force of will and resources. Please, what's your name? Isaiah, he answered, adding after a moment's hesitation. Isaiah Rivers. Mr. Rivers, can I ask what you do? Christine continued. The question seeming innocuous but carrying weight of evaluation, of assessment, of gathering information that would inform whatever was coming next. I work warehouse during the day, Isaiah said. The admission automatic, because he'd answered this question countless times, had learned that people asked about employment as proxy for asking about worth, as way of categorizing him into boxes that determined how he'd be treated. Security guard at night. To support your son, Christine clarified, the statement connecting dots that were becoming increasingly clear. Building picture of single father working himself to exhaustion, of parents sacrificing everything for child's needs, of someone living the reality she'd been avoiding with Lily by throwing money at the problem instead of actually solving it. Yes, ma'am, Isaiah confirmed. The honorific automatic and somewhat dated but carrying the respect he'd been raised to show, regardless of whether that respect was returned or earned or even noticed. Christine pulled a business card from her suit jacket with the smooth practice motion of someone who handed out cards constantly, who used them as currency and introduction and promise of access to power and resources. I'm Christine Prescott, she said, though her name was unnecessary because everyone in the city knew who Christine Prescott was, knew her buildings and her wealth and her reputation for ruthless business acumen. I own Prescott Enterprises. The addition was also unnecessary, but served as a reminder of exactly who was making the offer that was coming next, exactly how much power and resources backed whatever she was about to propose. And I'd like to offer you a job, Christine said, the statement landing between them like bomb, like proposition so unexpected that Isaiah's exhausted brain couldn't quite process what he'd just heard, couldn't reconcile stranger offering employment based on 5 minutes of interaction and one granola bar given to a crying child. A job, Isaiah repeated, the question implicit in his tone, the confusion evident in his expression. Doing what? Being my daughter's security detail, Christine answered. But the explanation continued because clearly the job was more than just security, was something that couldn't be captured in simple title or job description, but also being someone who sees her, Christine continued, voice carrying the weight of recognition, of understanding that she'd failed at something essential, that wealth hadn't solved the problem that mattered most. Someone who stops when she needs help instead of walking past like she's invisible. Someone who understands that children need more than money, need more than things, need more than the material comfort I've been providing while missing what she actually needs. They need people who care, Christine finished, the admission costing her something, revealing the crack in her perfect CEO facade, acknowledging that for all her success in business, she'd been failing at the one job that actually mattered, which was being present for her daughter. $85,000 annually, Christine stated, numbers concrete and specific and designed to make clear this was real offer, not hypothetical consideration. Designed to communicate that she was serious and prepared to back that seriousness with compensation that would transform Isaiah's entire life. Full health insurance with family coverage, she continued, and Isaiah's breath caught because health insurance meant Noah's asthma would be covered, meant inhalers wouldn't cost $45 that represented his last money, meant medical care wouldn't be choice between treatment and rent. Including your son's pre-existing conditions, Christine added, making explicit what insurance companies usually excluded, removing the barrier that made comprehensive coverage impossible for chronically ill children whose parents couldn't afford premium plans. Flexible hours so you can actually be with Noah, Christine finished. The offer complete and comprehensive and specifically designed to address every pressure point in Isaiah's life. Every source of stress and scarcity and impossible choice between competing necessities. Isaiah couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was hearing, couldn't reconcile the numbers Christine was saying with the reality of his current existence, making $24,000 annually, by working 2 jobs that consumed every hour he wasn't sleeping or parenting. $85,000, he repeated, the number foreign in his mouth, disconnected from any reality he'd experienced in 34 years of life. I make $24,000 now, working 2 jobs. You gave my daughter your last meal, Christine said quietly, the statement carrying the weight of recognition, of understanding exactly what that sacrifice meant, of seeing past the simple act to the character it revealed. When you were hungry yourself, when you needed it for your own survival, when giving it away meant going without in ways that poverty makes dangerous, not just inconvenient. That's the kind of person I want around Lily, Christine continued, voice firm with decision made, with offer extended that wouldn't be rescinded. Someone who puts children first even when it costs them everything. Someone who stops when everyone else walks past. Someone who sees a crying child and chooses compassion over convenience, even when compassion means sacrifice you can't afford. 2 weeks after Christine Prescott offered Isaiah Rivers a job that would transform his entire existence. Isaiah was working for her with a salary of $85,000 annually that represented more than triple what he'd been making working 2 jobs that consumed every waking hour, with health insurance that covered Noah's asthma completely, including inhalers and nebulizer treatments and specialist visits and emergency room trips. With coverage so comprehensive that the pharmacy visits that used to drain his bank account now cost nothing beyond a small copay that felt like luxury compared to the impossible choices he'd been making between medication and rent. He'd quit his second job, walked away from the night security shifts that had meant sleeping 4 hours and parenting exhausted, walked away from the warehouse work that had destroyed his back and his hands and his energy, walked away from the brutal mathematics of poverty that said work twice as hard for half as much and still fall short every month. He spent evenings with Noah now, actual evenings where he was present and awake and capable of attention instead of just physical presence, while his mind shut down from exhaustion, evenings where they cooked dinner together and did homework together and read stories before bed, evenings that felt like the childhood Noah deserved instead of the survival mode that poverty had forced on both of them. Lily visited regularly to play with Noah, these 2 7-year-olds who'd been connected by their father's unexpected friendship, who discovered they both loved dinosaurs and building blocks and making up elaborate stories about adventures they'd have when they were older. They became best friends with the instant intensity that children bring to relationships, with the uncomplicated affection that adults had forgotten how to access, with the pure joy of finding someone who saw them and liked them and chose to spend time with them, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. 1 month after Isaiah started working for Christine, he was providing security in the official sense, was the person who drove Lily to school and picked her up, who stood watch at events and maintained awareness of surroundings and ensured her physical safety with the systematic attention of someone who understood that protection required constant vigilance. But mainly he provided presence, provided the thing Lily had been desperately needing, which wasn't another bodyguard or another employee, but an actual human who saw her as person, not responsibility, who paid attention not because he was paid to, but because he genuinely cared about her well-being and happiness. He took Lily to school events when Christine was too busy, sat through piano recitals and art shows and parent-teacher conferences, filled the space that should have been occupied by her mother, but was instead occupied by this kind man who'd stopped when she was crying and hungry and had somehow become the most consistent adult presence in her life, besides the nanny who was paid to care. Isaiah ensured Lily wasn't alone in the ways that mattered, wasn't just physically accompanied, but actually seen and heard and valued, wasn't just supervised, but genuinely engaged with by someone who asked about her day and listened to her answers and remembered what she said and followed up on conversations they'd started days earlier. She called him Mr. Isaiah with 7-year-old formality that somehow made the title affectionate instead of distant, trusted him completely in ways that took months to build with adults, but had formed almost instantly because he'd fed her when she was hungry and had asked nothing in return, because his first interaction with her had been pure kindness without agenda or expectation, because children's trust once earned was absolute and unwavering and more precious than any salary Christine could have offered. 3 months after that park bench meeting that had changed both their trajectories, Christine noticed Lily's happiness with the startled recognition of someone who'd been so focused on work that she'd missed her daughter's transformation, who'd been so consumed by building empire that she'd failed to see the child thriving under someone else's care and attention. She asked Isaiah with genuine bewilderment mixed with something that might have been jealousy, or might have been gratitude, or might have been shame. "What did you do? How did you make her this happy when I've been trying for years and failing?" "I just spend time with her," Isaiah answered simply, the explanation containing no judgment, but carrying implicit critique of everything Christine had been doing wrong, of all the ways she'd been substituting things for time and money for presents and expensive gifts for actual attention. That's what she needed. Not more toys or fancier schools or bigger birthday parties or any of the material things you've been providing. Not money, time. The word landed between them with the weight of revelation, with the truth that Christine had been avoiding, because acknowledging it meant admitting she'd been failing at the one job that actually mattered, which was being present for her daughter. Christine realized her mistake with the devastating clarity of someone finally seeing what had been obvious all along, finally understanding that Lily hadn't needed a billionaire mother who could buy her everything but an available mother who chose to be with her, finally recognizing that all her success in business meant nothing if she was losing her daughter to loneliness and neglect disguised as privilege. She started leaving work early, started prioritizing 5 p.m. departures over midnight finishes, started choosing dinner with Lily over deals that could wait until tomorrow, started actually being present in her daughter's life instead of just financially supporting it from a distance. She spent evenings with Lily doing the simple things that wealth had taught her to delegate, helped with homework, and made dinner and played games and read stories, discovered that her daughter was funny and creative and brilliant in ways Christine had been too busy to notice, discovered that being present required no special skills beyond choosing to be there and actually paying attention when you were. Their relationship healed with the gradual rebuilding that comes when people choose connection over convenience, when parents choose presence over profit, when love becomes action instead of just abstract concept discussed between board meetings. 6 months after Isaiah had given away his last granola bar to a crying child on a park bench, Noah and Lily were inseparable in ways that transcended their initial friendship, had become something like siblings, like family chosen rather than biological, like the particular bond that forms between children who understand each other's pain and help each other heal from it. Isaiah and Christine had become close friends within the bounds of professional relationship, maintained appropriate boundaries because he worked for her, and romance would complicate dynamics that were working beautifully as friendship and mutual respect, but developed deep connection built on shared experience of single parenthood and shared commitment to their children's well-being. "You taught me what matters," Christine told Isaiah during one of their evening conversations while their children played, the admission costing her pride, but earning her peace. The acknowledgement that someone making $24,000 working 2 jobs had understood something essential about parenting that she'd missed despite all her business acumen and strategic thinking. "You gave my son a future," Isaiah replied. The gratitude absolute because Noah's asthma was controlled and his childhood was stable and his father was present instead of exhausted, because everything had changed when Christine had chosen to see Isaiah's character instead of his poverty, had chosen to reward his kindness instead of just accepting it and moving on. 1 year after that Tuesday evening in Lincoln Park, they returned to the same bench where everything had started, where Isaiah had stopped walking and Christine had found her daughter, and 2 families had collided in ways that would transform both of them permanently. Isaiah and Noah and Christine and Lily sat together on the bench that had witnessed the beginning of their story, spread out a picnic blanket on grass, where Lily had been crying alone and hungry and desperate for someone to see her, ate sandwiches and fruit and cookies in the particular chaos of families who are comfortable together, who have moved past politeness into genuine affection. "Remember when you gave me that granola bar?" Lily asked Isaiah. The memory still vivid a year later because children remember kindness with the clarity that adults forget, because that moment had been the hinge on which her entire life had turned from lonely to loved. "Best granola bar I ever gave away," Isaiah confirmed, grinning at this child who'd become as important to him as his own son, who called him Mr. Isaiah and trusted him and had taught him that helping strangers could transform into helping family. "You changed our lives," Christine said quietly, the statement encompassing everything that had shifted in 12 months, everything she learned about what mattered and what didn't, everything that had healed when she'd finally started prioritizing correctly. "You changed ours," Isaiah replied, the gratitude mutual because transformation had gone both directions, because the person with nothing had given everything, and the person with everything had learned what nothing meant, because both families had been broken in different ways and had somehow helped each other heal through the simple mathematics of kindness, creating connection, creating family. Christine had started a foundation inspired by Isaiah's compassion, called it Feed a Child, with a straightforward naming that made its mission immediately clear, dedicated it to providing meals to hungry kids across the city, because if one granola bar had changed 2 lives, then maybe thousands of meals could change thousands of lives. The foundation provided breakfast programs and lunch assistance and dinner deliveries and emergency food support, operated on the principle that no child should be hungry when resources existed to feed them. that poverty shouldn't determine whether children ate or whether they learned effectively or whether they felt valued and seen and cared for by the community around them. Isaiah helped run the foundation alongside his security work, brought the perspective of someone who'd lived the problem they were trying to solve, who understood hunger not as abstract concept, but as lived experience, who knew what it meant to choose between feeding yourself and feeding your child, and always choosing your child. Noah and Lily helped distribute food at weekend events. These two 8-year-olds who'd been brought together by hunger and kindness, now helping ensure other children didn't experience what Lily had experienced on that park bench, didn't feel invisible while surrounded by people who could help but chose not to. The foundation had served 15,000 meals in its first year, had expanded from one distribution site to 12, had hired staff who'd experienced food insecurity themselves, because Christine had learned from Isaiah that lived experience mattered more than credentials, that people who survived poverty understood it better than people who'd only studied it. Full circle from one granola bar given by someone who had nothing to systematic program funded by someone who had everything, from individual kindness to institutional response, from one child helped to thousands of families supported. "Thank you for stopping," Lily said to Isaiah as they packed up their picnic, the gratitude encompassing everything that had followed from that initial choice, everything that had grown from one moment of compassion into family and friendship and foundation. When everyone else walked past, the addition still carried weight a year later, still reminded them both that lots of people had seen her suffering and chosen not to help. That Isaiah's stopping had been exceptional, not because stopping should be exceptional, but because most people had chosen not to. "Thank you for teaching your mom that time matters more than money," Isaiah replied, acknowledging Christine's transformation, recognizing that she'd learned what he'd been trying to teach through example, that she'd changed everything about how she parented, and that change had healed her daughter in ways no amount of wealth ever could. Noah and Lily were playing on the grass near the bench, running and laughing with the unself-conscious joy of children who felt safe and loved and seen, children who'd both been lonely in different ways and had found in each other the friendship that healed that loneliness. Isaiah and Christine sat watching them with the particular contentment of parents who'd figured out what mattered, who'd learned from each other across the gap of wealth and poverty, who'd built something like family from the unlikely foundation of a granola bar and a park bench, and two people who'd both been desperate in different ways. Two families healed not despite their differences, but because of them. Not despite one having nothing and one having everything, but because nothing and everything had both proved insufficient until kindness created bridge between them. He fed a hungry girl out of kindness, gave his last granola bar to a crying child on a park bench when he was hungry himself and exhausted from 10 hours of warehouse work and down to his last $23 until Friday, when he'd spent his last $45 on his son's inhaler that morning and had nothing left for dinner or breakfast or any meal until he could figure out how to make almost no money feed two people for 3 days. When walking past would have been easier, and keeping his only food would have been justified, and no one would have blamed him for choosing his own survival over a stranger's need. Unaware she was a billionaire's child, unaware that the crying 7-year-old in the dirty silk dress was Lily Prescott, whose mother's name was on half the buildings in downtown, and whose wealth was measured in billions. Unaware that one act of compassion would transform both their lives in ways that went far beyond the $85,000 salary and the health insurance and the stable housing and all the material improvements that followed. Because sometimes the person you help when you have nothing becomes the person who gives you everything. Because sometimes giving away your last meal opens doors you never knew existed. Because sometimes kindness is rewarded not just with gratitude, but with transformation. Christine Prescott offered Isaiah a job not because she needed security, but because she needed someone who understood that children need time more than money, presence more than presence, attention more than acquisitions, someone who would see her daughter when everyone else walked past, someone who would stop to help when stopping cost everything. And Isaiah taught a billionaire CEO what her daughter needed most, which wasn't another toy or fancier school or bigger trust fund or any of the material things Christine had been providing, while missing the essential thing, which was a mother who came home for dinner, who prioritized bedtime stories over board meetings, who chose time over profit, who learned from a man making $24,000 working 2 jobs that wealth means nothing if you're too busy to love the people who matter, that success in business is meaningless if you're failing at the one job that actually counts, which is being present for your child. If this story reminded you that kindness matters more than wealth, that helping someone when you have nothing is worth more than helping when you have everything, that the smallest acts of compassion can transform lives in ways you'll never predict, then you know these messages need to reach more people who are struggling and need hope, who are lonely and need connection, who think their circumstances prevent them from making a difference, when actually their circumstances might be exactly what qualifies them to help in ways wealthy people never could. Would you give your last meal to a hungry stranger when you're desperate yourself? When helping them means going without? When kindness costs everything you have left? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10, because your engagement helps us know that stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things matter to you, that compassion across class lines inspires you, that you believe in a world where helping each other is more important than helping ourselves, where one granola bar can change 2 families, where stopping when everyone else walks past is the beginning of transformation,